We are told that Christmas is all about light. It is about tinsel and neon signs and fighting the darkness with aggressive cheerfulness. We are told it is a beginning. But historically, that's a lie. The winter solstice isn't the festival of light. It is the festival of the death of the sun. It is the longest night of the year. And traditionally, you didn't sit around the fire to tell happy stories. You sat there to tell ghost stories. The ancients actually called this Solstitium, literally, the sun standing still. And that is exactly what this season is. It isn't just a date on the calendar. It is a moment when the sun stops, time freezes, and the darkness waits. That is why ghost stories were an essential component of the time around Christmas for Victorians, as families and friends gathered around the fire while the winter weather raged outside. After all, the solstice is the time of the symbolic death of the sun, and therefore the most befitting time of the year for a ghost story. In this episode, we have brought to you 3 such ghost stories, ranging from the Victorian period to the early 20th century. These stories are full of the holiday charm with detailed descriptions of food and festivities, and they often depict the scene of the telling of the ghost story itself. And we will discuss such Victorian classic Christmas food such as plum puddings and roast beef, so it is a video for the Victorian food enthusiasts as well. But these stories also have lurking presences of ghosts, which can be both charming and a bit chilling. In particular, I will discuss stories by Frederick Manley, Lettice Galbraith, and Hugh Walpole, none of whom might be well known today, but they are amazing short story writers, and they sure as hell know how to blend charm with chill. You can read all of these stories in the British Library anthology Sunless Solstice, Strange Christmas Tales for the Longest Nights. So pour yourself a glass of punch, lock the doors, and join me in this adventure to find the spooky side of Christmas. Historically, European cultures deeply revered the solstice, often seeing it as a powerful symbol of death and subsequent rebirth. Fire was a central element in their celebrations, symbolizing the much anticipated return of light. Remarkably, major ancient structures such as the Stonehenge and Newgrange were constructed with precise alignment to the solstice. In Scandinavia, the pre-Christian feast of Yule marked the winter solstice. The tradition involved lighting fires, which represented the life-giving power of the sun, and burning a Yule log or a tree in the hearth. The timing of the ancient Roman festival, Saturnalia, coincided with this, which was a week-long festival of light culminating in the winter solstice, and saw a complete inversion of the social order. So slaves were served by their masters, and gambling was permitted. All of this helped to establish the date for the Christian holiday of Christmas. Coming back to the Victorians, they practically invented the modern Christmas as we know it. So the Christmas tree, Christmas cards, crackers, Father Christmas, family feasts, and gift-giving centered around the home are all Victorian additions. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's German husband, introduced the German tradition of decorating a fir tree with candles and ornaments. An 1848 illustration of the royal family with their tree made it a national sensation. Sir Henry Cole created the first commercial Christmas card in 1843, allowing people to send festive greetings cheaply, thanks to the penny post. The holiday shifted from a rowdy festival practiced by the nobility to a sentimental, middle-class, family-oriented event, emphasizing home, goodwill, charity, partly influenced by Dickens's A Christmas Carol, published in 1843. So turkey dinners, Christmas pudding, and gift exchanges became staples. But in a sense, the Victorians invented the tinsel, the cards, and the family turkey because they were terrified of the dark winter, as we see in their ghost stories. Just quickly before we dive into the stories, if you like this deep dive into the dark, you need to be here in January. We are launching a new series called the Elemental Gothic series, unwinding the horror of the jungle, the ocean, the insect swarms, and so on. So subscribe to ensure you do not miss any of these episodes. The Victorian ghost story most likely evolved from the folk tradition of telling winter tales. The tradition of telling ghost stories in winter is an ancient folk custom, a way for families to pass the long dark nights with narratives of spirits and monsters. This practice is highlighted in Elizabethan literature, such as when Mamilius declares in Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale, I quote, "A sad tale's best for winter, I have one, of spirits and goblins," unquote. Similarly, the protagonist of Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta recalls, and I quote, "Now I remember those old women's words, who in my wealth would tell me winter's tales. and speak of spirits and ghosts that glide by night, unquote. Charles Dickens was a pivotal person to repopularize telling the ghost stories on Christmas Eve, often featuring them in his magazines, especially Household Words and also All the Year Round. These Christmas-linked publications, including A Christmas Carol, The Chimes, and The Haunted Man, the latter two also featuring a man who was reformed by a ghost, established a connection between the holiday and the ghost stories, which Dickens himself calls in The Seven Poor Travelers the witching time for storytelling. So Dickens was, in some ways, the prime force behind Victorian Christmas ghost stories. He seized his Christmas publications in 1868, telling his friend, the actor Charles Fletcher, that he felt, and I quote, as if I had murdered a Christmas number years ago. Perhaps I did, and its ghost perpetually haunted me, unquote. However, the tradition of Christmas ghost stories had already taken a life of its own by this time with other writers such as Arthur Conan Doyle and Elizabeth Gaskell. So by the late 19th century, the ghost story had become so integral to Christmas that in Henry James's famous Gothic novella, you probably know this one, The Turn of the Screw, the framed story involves a group of men sitting around the fire telling ghost stories on Christmas Eve, even as he moves away from the Dickensian sentimental ghost story. So our first story is Frederick Manley's Irish Christmas story. It's called The Ghost at the Crossroads, which was published in the South London Press in December 1893. So the story is set on a wild, stormy Christmas night in 1893 at Andy Sweeney's homestead in Derrygoland, Ireland. Inside, Sweeney and his neighbors are enjoying a lavish feast, music, and punch, safe from the blizzard outside. The story begins. Night, and especially Christmas night, is the best time to listen to a ghost story. And as a reader, I couldn't agree more. The vivid descriptions of the joyful Christmas scenes, the hills of potatoes, lakes of soups, mountains of roast beef, and I'm quoting here, draws the reader in and absolutely serves to heighten the chilling tale which unfolds when a stranger arrives in their midst. And this stranger is young and well dressed and presumably an Englishman. He bursts into the cottage screaming for help and collapses unconscious on the floor. So after he is revived by the guests with soups and punch, he recounts the events that drove him there. Now, it is hard to summarize the atmosphere of Manley's The Ghost at the Crossroads, but the story is like this. This young man explains that he has been walking from a squire's house towards his inn when he becomes hopelessly lost in the snow and was ready to die of cold. Suddenly, a tall man dressed entirely in black, suspicious, appears and promises to save him. This mysterious figure guided him to a set of crossroads marked by a flat milestone. At the crossroads, the man in black asked to be repaid for his help by satisfying a craving he had for gambling. And then he goes on to produce a pack of cards and a lantern and all the paraphernalia required for gambling. And they play a game called 45s on a snowy milestone. Does this game exist? Do you know this game? Let us know that. The young man initially wins, but then his luck turns sour until he loses all the money to the stranger. The stranger offers to return the gold if the young man would wager his word to become the stranger's servant unto the end of time. Ooh. So desperate to win his money back, the young soldier agreed to the wager. Big mistake. However, when he dropped his cards and looked down to pick them up, he saw that the man in black did not have a boot but a cloven hoof. Realizing that he had been gambling with the devil for his soul, the young man fled in terror until he saw the light of Sweeney's cottage. Frederick Manley's The Ghost at the Crossroads relies heavily on the juxtaposition between the interior and the exterior, which captures the atmosphere of the winter solstice perfectly, and that makes it such a quintessential story of Christmas. The house of Sweeney is a fortress of light and warmth where the community huddles together. It represents human solidarity against the dark. The blizzard outside is called the Storm King, who actively, and I quote again, hated Andy Sweeney's snug home. The protagonist who bursts into this scene of warm home and hearth has just played a game of cards with the devil. But he's not tempted by evil directly. He is tempted by the social rituals of the upper class English society. So, polite conversation and gambling. He admits he turned to the stranger because he was so very affable with his beaver hat and black clothes, which is a contrast from the usual people of the Irish countryside. The card game takes place on a flat milestone at the crossroads. And in Irish and European folklore, the crossroads is a kind of a liminal space, a sort of no man's land, where the veil between the worlds is thin. It is the traditional burial place for suicides and the meeting place for darker spirits. But the story also keeps the spook somewhat lighthearted rather than going into like a full-throated account of damnation. So the narrator admits at the end that some locals believed that the young man had simply been, drinking freely, and that the devil he saw is what they called a blue devil caused by intoxication. So I think it was common to just drink so much that you see a devil, and so they had an actual name for it, the blue devil. The story suggests that at the winter solstice, the veil between reality and hallucinations is thin, but one needs to hold on to the veil with Christmas lights and family and even a shared ghost story. Okay, on to the next story. Lettice Galbraith's The Blue Room, 1897, is a compelling story that details the almost century long malevolent history of a room at Merton Towers, which proves fatal to young women. It was originally published in Macmillan's magazine in October 1897. The narrator is presented through the eyes of Mrs. Maris, the head housekeeper. Near the end of her service, Mrs. Maris recounts how a young female guest at the Towers made a determined effort to conquer the Blue Room and put an end to its deadly reign. So, the story opens during a Christmas gathering with a large party, which meant that the Blue Room needed to be occupied, despite its reputation of being haunted. A chamber avoided by the family because of a legend surrounding Lady Barbara Merton, who died there mysteriously years ago. The story is set in late 19th century, a time when the new woman, educated, independent, skeptical, was just emerging. So, as Miss Ariston, a Cambridge graduate herself, and a new woman occupies the room and gets haunted by the incubus of Lady Barbara Merton, whom she summoned to secure an heir while her husband was dying of consumption, tuberculosis, we realize that the past lingers on in the present. So, this short story captures the economics of the Gothic really well. The haunting, I think, is a direct result of the economic pressure placed on women to produce heirs. Lady Barbara turned to hell because the law gave her no other option for survival. The ghost is actually a manifestation of desperate economic necessity. Okay, we are going into the details now. So there are two timelines in Galbraith's ghost story. I'm talking about the Blue Room. 50 years earlier, a guest named Miss Wood slept in the Blue Room during a crowded party and was found dead of shock the next morning, her body crumpled on the bed just like the mysterious crumples that the housekeeper had noticed hours before on the bed before anybody slept. Now, in the present day, the late 19th century, a new generation gathers at the Merton Towers, including the heir of the family, Mr. Arthur, his friend, Mr. Calder Maxwell, who was also a student of demonology, and Miss Ariston, a Cambridge graduate new woman, and she was also a skeptic. Now, Miss Ariston volunteers to sleep in the room to prove that the ghost is a myth. Now, this is something you should never do in a ghost story. Of course, she has terrifying visions of a handsome young man standing before her, and she faints. Upon recovering, Miss Ariston describes a vivid dream in which she was compelled to open a secret panel in the bedpost and light a pastil from a silver box found within. So pastils are like little pellets which can be burnt, and they have good fragrances and so on. The group returns to the room, opens the secret panel, and discovers hidden items. Maxwell, the student of demonology, explains that Lady Barbara, desperate to provide an heir to secure her inheritance, had practiced black magic. The most effective scare in this story isn't the ghost appearing, but the physical evidence of it waiting. Mrs. Mary sees the bed, and I'm going to quote here, crumpled just as if someone had thrown themselves across it, unquote, even though the room is empty. So this is the physical weight of history, as it were. The past is pressing down on the present, literally coming to crumple up the bed. I highly recommend this story as a spooky Christmas read, or anytime read, basically. Our final ghost story in this spooky Christmas episode is Mr. Huffam by Hugh Walpole, who is actually related to Horace Walpole, the writer of the first English Gothic novel, The Castle of Otranto. The story was first published in the Strand magazine in 1933, and it captures the lingering presence of Victorian Christmas with a ghostly presence of none other than Charles Dickens himself. So, Charles Dickens as a ghost. I highly recommend his novel called Rogue Harry's. He was admired by writers including Arnold Bennett and Joseph Conrad, and he was also a close friend of Virginia Woolf. So, yes, the story, Mr. Huffam, opens by painting a bleak picture of the post war 1920s, 1930s world. The story follows this Tubby Winslow, who is a wealthy young man who is feeling miserable on Christmas Eve because his fiancée, Diana Lane Fox, has broken off their engagement, calling him useless and fat. That's like so many of us when all this everyone is making merry. We feel like that. That's a familiar feeling at some or the other point in our lives, right? Anyway, or maybe it's just me. So Winslow represents the modern generation. He is rich but useless, ignorant, and depressed. His parents, Sir Roderick and Lady Winslow, are bored, melancholic, and live in a house that, I quote, refuses to play the game. While crossing Piccadilly in the snow, Tubby saves a strange man from being hit by a car. This man, Mr. Huffam, is energetic, bearded, and dressed in an old fashioned style. Now, I need to quote here. He was wearing a high, sharp pointed collar, a black stock with a jeweled tie pin, and a most remarkable waistcoat, purple in color and covered with little red flowers. Unquote. He is jubilant about Christmas, calling it the best time of the year, and Tubby impulsively invites him home to tea. Mr. Huffam turns out to be a Dickensian spirit haunting the post-war world. In the course of the story, he teaches the house's melancholic inhabitants how to celebrate Christmas, organizing the party, the punch, and the dancing. So, yeah, I highly recommend reading it. In Hugh Walpole's Mr. Huffam, when Teddy Winslow takes the stranger to his aristocratic but somewhat stuffy home in Hill Street, the atmosphere is quite glum, not much Christmassy. Mr. Huffam surprisingly charms Tubby's mother and his father with his storytelling, his vivacity, and of course, turkey and Christmas pudding. Mr. Huffam tells stories about his own youth working at a factory, putting labels on blacking bottles in the freezing cold. He takes charge of the household. He rearranges the furniture. He helps decorate the hall with holly and dictates a love letter for the shy butler, Mallow. Mr. Huffam insists on throwing a children's party on Christmas night, despite Lady Winslow's protest that they do not know any children. On Christmas night, a horde of children of all classes arrive at the house, though it is unclear exactly where they came from. The party is a magical success, with a massive Christmas tree, games, and Mr. Huffam acting as Father Christmas. The next morning, Mr. Huffam vanished without sleeping in his bed. The only trace left behind is a first edition of Martin Chuzzlewit propped against the clock in the drawing room. Inside the book, Lady Winslow finds a fresh inscription, and I quote, "For Lady Winslow, with gratitude from her friend the author, Charles Dickens." The story implies that the spirit of Christmas past was, in fact, the ghost of Dickens himself. Walpole implies that the spirit of Christmas isn't an abstract feeling. It was an invention of the Victorian era, specifically championed by Dickens. Without the ghost of Dickens and a little bit of haunting, the modern Christmas would have fallen flat. And with that, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. This spring, we move from the haunted house to the hostile earth with our new series, The Elemental Gothic. From the choking winds of botanical Gothic to the crushing waves of the nautical Gothic, we will analyze how Gothic literature uses the material world to unsettle the human subject. The series would be structured like a course plan. Subscribe now to ensure that you don't miss out the first lesson in this syllabus of dread. I will see you in 2026.